Our mission for this deep dive is to really explore this family's historical and spiritual journey. Specifically, we're unpacking their profound transition from the ancient Suhrawardi Sufi order all the way to Islam Ahmadiyya.
Right, and we'll really get into what this document reveals about, the divine blessings of accepting the promised Messiah of the age, and basically returning to a clearer, truer form of Islam.
Which is such a powerful theme. I mean, inheriting a spiritual legacy is infinitely more complex than, say, inheriting an antique watch or, a family house. Because faith isn't something you can just sign over in a will. It has to be practiced. It has to be protected. And as we'll see, sometimes it has to be entirely reevaluated based on new truths.
Yeah, and whether you're intensely curious about spiritual history or just, trying to figure out how beliefs actually get passed down through generations, this deep dive offers just a fascinating lens on how we navigate inherited faith versus personal conviction.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because for the longest time, there was this massive historical confusion within the Sami family. There was this huge rumor that some branches of their family tree were originally Shia Muslims.
Right, it was just deeply ingrained family folklore. Everyone just assumed it was true.
It was absolute fact at every family reunion. But then, recent translations and deep research into their Shajra Nasab, their family tree, proved this was entirely false.
Completely false.
Yeah. Their direct family line had absolutely no original link to Shia Islam. Instead, the records showed that Hazrat Misbah-ud-Din and his brothers were Suhrawardi Muslims.
And that's an affiliation that traces all the way back to Bukhara, right? Long before the family even settled across the Punjab region.
Exactly. And it's like finding a vintage trunk in your attic, and you pull out this family recipe you always thought was, Italian, but then you translate it and realize it's actually ancient Greek.
That is such a great way to put it. You've been operating on a completely wrong foundational assumption.
Right. But it does make you wonder, if they were so firmly rooted in the Suhrawardi order, where on earth did this Shia rumor even come from?
What's fascinating here is how the document explains the mechanics of that. The causal link to the Shia identity wasn't ancestral at all.
Wait, really? Then what was it?
It was a much later socio-cultural shift. So Hazrat Misbah-ud-Din and his brother eventually accepted Ahmadiyyat, but the rest of their brothers remained Suhrawardi. Then, in a later generation, one of those brothers had a daughter-in-law who was Shia.
Just one daughter-in-law?
Yeah, just one. And she influenced her husband's siblings and her children to enter Shia Jafari Islam.
Wow. So just one person marrying into the family rewrote the entire ancestral narrative in the minds of the descendants.
Basically, yeah. She dictated the oral history and the practices in her household, and over time, they just assumed they had always been Shia.
Simply because hers was the loudest voice in the room during those formative years. That is wild.
It really is. And that's exactly why documenting this history matters so much to the authors of this text. It separates that inherited folklore from actual historical truth for the new generation.
Right, which totally makes sense. Establishing that the family's true roots were actually Suhrawardi is a huge deal. But it also naturally raises a really critical question for me.
Which is?
Well, if they were already part of this incredibly established Islamic spiritual order from Bukhara, what caused the dramatic shift in their faith later on? You don't just walk away from that kind of legacy on a whim.
No, definitely not. And this brings us to the defining turning point of the whole document. The narrative highlights Hazrat Khalifatul Masih as this pivotal figure. He's the one who personally guided Hazrat Misbah-ud-Din and his brother toward the message of the promised Messiah of the age. And that encounter just opened a completely new path of faith, khilafat, and spiritual truth for them.
But wait, I want to push back on this a little bit to stimulate some critical thinking here.
Sure, go ahead.
If the Suhrawardi order and these, earlier Muslim saints were already providing moral discipline and bringing them closer to Allah, why the need to transition at all? Doesn't changing your spiritual path kind of imply the old way was broken?
That's the most common assumption people make, right?
Yeah.
That you only leave something if it's broken or invalid. But if we analyze the text's specific phrasing, it wasn't about discarding a broken past at all.
Oh, really? How do they frame it?
It was about elevating it. The text explicitly honors those earlier saints. It says they gave vital moral and spiritual structure to the region when it was desperately needed.
Okay, so they aren't trashing the past.
Not at all. But the family believed that Ahmadiyyat brought that exact same guidance into a clearer and more complete form through the promised Messiah.
I see. So it represents the moment their inherited spirituality was basically upgraded to a higher path of personal conviction.
Exactly. It wasn't a rejection of Islam. It was stepping into a truer, more crystallized form of it.
It's kind of like the difference between inheriting this beautiful antique map of the stars and then suddenly being handed a high-powered telescope.
Oh, I love that.
Right. The map isn't wrong. It guided your ancestors perfectly well for centuries. But the telescope gives you a much clearer, real-time view of the exact same sky.
That visual captures it perfectly. The saints laid the foundation, but the promised Messiah provided the ultimate clarity for the current age.
Okay, so Hazrat Misbah ad-Din embraces this new clarity, this new telescope. But what happens when the pull of the past, and honestly, the temptation of worldly wealth, threatens to drag the family back?
That is exactly what happens next in the story.
Here's where it gets really interesting, folks, because there's this highly specific and captivating anecdote in the text. Later on, one of Hazrat Misbah ad-Din's sons actually attempts to recover some family land in a place called Guri Malian in Sialkot.
Yeah, and recovering ancestral land is usually a massive win. I mean, its status, its generational wealth.
But the transaction was never completed. They entirely failed to get the land back.
On paper, it looks like a devastating material loss.
But it's so wild because sometimes the universe just slams a door shut to keep you from walking back into a bad habit, you know? The family actually frames this real estate loss as a massive spiritual win.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the family's interpretation of this event is profound. The text explains that reclaiming that land would have risked returning them to this older, quote, shrine-based, peer-centered religious culture.
Right, and we should clarify what that means. A peer-centered culture is heavily steeped in superstition, right? Where local holy men act as gatekeepers to God.
Exactly. You don't just pray independently. You pay tribute at shrines to secure good fortune for your crops or your family. The spiritual economy is tied to the agrarian economy.
So if you own huge tracts of land there, you're locked into that ecosystem. You have to participate in those local rituals just to survive socially.
Yes, and for the Sami family, Islam Ahmadiyya had dismantled that entire gatekeeper system. The promised Messiah had reestablished a direct connection to Allah.
So moving back to Sialkot would have been a massive step backward. They would be trading their newly clarified faith for a plot of dirt.
Which is why losing the land was viewed as divine protection. It kept them anchored to the clearer spiritual blessings of Islam Ahmadiyya. Any move back toward the peer system is explicitly viewed in the text as a departure from higher guidance.
That is a stunning way to look at a financial loss. Recognizing that a material loss was actually a spiritual safeguard. It perfectly sets up the final lesson of this document.
It really does. It forces the question, how should the modern generation measure their true inheritance?
Right. Because the closing reflections of the narrative point out that the Shajra Nasab isn't just a list of names to memorize.
No, believing in it means taking Hazrat Misbah ad-Din's account seriously and valuing the fact that this lineage was spiritually affirmed by Khilafat, by family elders, and by Darbar custodians.
And the text says that affirmation itself is regarded as a massive blessing.
It's the ultimate stamp of approval on their journey.
So what does this all mean? I want you listening to really think about this. When you look at your own family tree, what are you actually looking for? Because the Sami document explicitly tells the new generation to look for something else entirely.
Yeah, it urges them to value truth over superstition.
And righteousness over inherited custom. The greatest honor in this family story isn't about who owned what land in Sialkot or carrying some specific ancestral title.
The true honor is the divine blessing of being guided to what is true, finding that clearer path, and having the courage to stay on it. For those who want to explore this history more deeply in Urdu, more can be learned through the accounts of Hazrat Misbah ad-Din's journey, the service of his son Munir Sami to Islam Ahmadiyya, and the life and writings of Sami Sami, who wrote Mary Punji and contributed many articles to Al-Fazl. These works help illuminate the Ahmadiyya chapter of the family's story and preserve the religious spirit in which that branch of the family lived and served. Mary Punji Al-Fazl.
It's an incredible journey. I mean, we moved from these ancient Suhrawardi roots in Bukhara, we debunked that Shia folklore, and we saw them find this clearer path of Ahmadiyya through the promised Messiah.
And along the way, they entirely redefined their family's legacy. They shifted it from land and material status to faith and divine guidance.
Which is incredibly powerful. And it leaves me with this final thought that I want you to mull over today. If a family's most valuable inheritance is actually their spiritual evolution and the truths they fought to embrace, what invisible inheritances like beliefs, biases, or blessings are you unconsciously passing down right now simply by the way you choose to live today?
That is a great question to end on.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.